Hi everybody and welcome to my weekly cult roll-up. I am Daniella, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, and the author of a book called Uncultured, which you see there, about growing up in the Children of God religious cult and going into the cult of the United States Army. You can get signed copies straight from me in the description, and I did the audiobook myself if you're a listener. This week, we are going to talk about everything that happened in the world of cults and in my world of cults. So right now, I am writing a book called The Culting of America, and I am halfway through, which means I've written 6 of the 11, 12 chapters that there are going to be. And the last chapter I just worked on was isolation. The next chapter I'm working on is language, how cults use and weaponize language. We will be talking about the wellness to crunchy pipeline to alt-right pipeline. We will be talking about the language of conspirituality. We'll even be talking about the fan-elect language of Taylor Swift. We'll be talking about thought-stopping cliches, loaded language, and all the different weapons of language that cults use. What makes a distinguishable vernacular in the first place, which is my point 6 of cults. And to me, I think that is, I describe it as if you need a translator, right? People are always like, well, every job has like its own language. It's like, if you can drop into an organization's like operations brief or team meeting and you can mostly understand what's going on, then no. Just having some words to describe what you do specifically, that's not enough of a distinguishable vernacular. But if you need a translator, this is where I put both the Army and the Children of God cult, that's a distinguishable vernacular. One of the big things about distinguishable vernacular is as soon as you come up with a word for us, you usually come up with a word for them. That soon becomes pejorative. In the Children of God, we called you systemites, and in the Army, we called you civilians. But actually this month, where I thought I was going to work ahead, I'm actually getting all the other chapters in order, the first 6 that I have written, because I have signed my contract. I am self-publishing or independently publishing The Culting of America. Yes, there will be an audiobook. Yes, they will all be available, hopefully by next Christmas, including signed audiobooks, something cool that I'm going to do. But I have to write it. So I'm working on that very hardcore, but I'm also very excited to be working again with Amy Reed, who was one of the writers that helped me with Uncultured and Un-American. And she's amazing. One of the things I'm doing, because this book is taking so long, ultimately by the time it comes out, it's going to have been a 3 or 3.5 year runway that some of you have been with me, hearing me read this book. So by the way, come join me on TikTok because I'm crowdsourcing it. I read stuff out loud all the time. There's a chapter that I'm going to edit out loud and get people's recommendations for sources, etc. But also, once every chapter is basically complete with me and my co-writer going over it, editor at this point, I read it out loud, and that lives on my Patreon. So that's one of the benefits you can get if you subscribe to my Patreon, along with my video book, a second memoir, Un-American, which will come out as a book after Culting of America. So very, very exciting, these projects, and going back through everything. It's crazy because I'm trying to fit everything about cult into one book, and it's too much, right? So at first, I really resisted putting a definition. We all know that I have this 10-part definition of cults that you can see on all my other social media. And actually, I'll just say it. So it's charismatic leadership. It's the worldview shift to come under the sacred assumption, the transcendent mission, the constant self-sacrifice of members, isolation or insulation from the world, distinguishable vernacular, cult language, us versus them mentality, high entrance and exit costs. 8 is exploitation of labor, ties to number 4, self-sacrifice. 9 is high exit and entrance costs, and 10 is ends justifies the means mentality. But I really resisted, as a cult baby, as someone who was born and raised in a cult, putting a definition onto it. Because I knew, 1, it's so much more complicated than that. But 2, as soon as you put a definition, a nice little listicle, especially cults will take that and they will use that to train their members to say that they're not cults or to fight back. Actually, one of the things I'm compiling this list of probably like 50, you might be in a cult if, And it's like, if you talk about being a cult or all the time, talk or joke, or you talk or joke about not being a cult all the time, both of those are concerning, because regular groups that aren't culty at all don't need to sit around wondering if they are cults. It's one of those things that we find. I also find that I have never been asked the question in good faith, is this group a cult? And looked at it and not found anything concerning. Because again, when we have good experiences with groups, we don't sit around wondering if we were in a cult. I think what we're trying to do when we say cult is we are trying to describe when an individual comes under the coercive control of a group. When an individual comes under the coercive control of another individual, we usually call that an abusive relationship. In cult studies, we call that a 1-1 cult. When an individual is growing up in a coercive household, that can be called a single family cult. And when an individual is under the coercive control of a larger group, we call that a cult. But it's also interesting because if I had just started off writing the book, I would have thought, okay, you can contain like the definition of cult in a book. But since I also started building my social media channels at the same time, I now realize that it's so much more complicated. It's so much more nuanced that you actually need like thousands of hours of just sitting around talking about it. I'm going to Philly in November to give a talk, and this is one of the things I'm telling them at university. And then I'm going to say, so if your professors expect you to respect them, think that they're awesome because they've written a book, ask them how their TikTok channel is doing. Fun. Okay, so I've been watching the show Big Love, which I think is an old show. I really wish it's something I had seen when I had first come out of the cult, because I would have realized so much more about what I had grown up in. As it was, I didn't realize for like 2 years that I had grown up in a cult. You get that moment in the book. And it was funny because my very next thought after, I grew up in a cult, like watching something happen on television and hearing them say Children of God cult. And then my next thought was like, oh, no wonder we talk so much about how we weren't a cult. Of course, that makes total sense now. Anyway, Big Love, it's very well done. And it's so funny because I keep telling my husband, like, yeah, they got commune life right. And it's like fundamentalist Mormons. It's supposed to be FLDS, right? Polygamist Mormons. My husband is like, how do you know? That's not the cult you grew up in. I was like, no, they got it right. Like, here's the thing. All cults are ultimately the same because, again, they're all about getting coercive control, right? Using coercive control to gain power. So you can gain your followers' labor, ultimately. Cults are always about labor. When I heard Dr. Janja Lalich say that, it absolutely changed the entire way that I understood my life. It's a really good show. It's really well done. I love that they seem to now be giving Nikki, who's the girl that grew up polygamous, she was the daughter of the leader and is married to the main guy of the show. And I love that she is now going through her own personal evolution and like realizing what she grew up with. It's really, really cool. Anyways, there have been a lot of things. It's well done. I encourage you all to watch it. Like, yes, it's fiction, but it's well done. If you haven't seen it, go check it out for sure. I'm also reading a book this week by Prachi Gupta, and it's called They Called Us Exceptional. And it's kind of about being, the immigrant experience of being a brown girl with a foreign name growing up in the U.S. and all that it entails. It's very well done. Prachi is a really awesome human. But I also think that for a lot of cult survivors, we feel, and we are in many ways, invisible immigrants, right? This is not the culture that we grew up in. And even though we might look like we fit, we definitely don't. So the book is speaking to me in a lot of ways. Go check it out. They Called Us Exceptional. If you grew up with the phrase, we are in this world, but not of this world, you definitely might need some cult deconstruction. And I think you would relate to my book, Uncultured. Actually, speaking of isolation, right? Like that's what it is. It's just walking around isolation. And this is the thing I really go into my chapters in isolation. Like I wrote 33 pages about isolation and physical isolation, like off on a compound like I was, or like you see in Big Love. that's only part of it, right? There's so many other ways that you can be isolated. And if you are in this world, but not of this world, you're isolated. If your prophet, president, leader, Mormons, is telling you, don't do business with unbelievers, you're isolated. And that's problematic because isolation always increases extremism. We saw this in COVID. For the first time now, our entire, not only country, but the entire world basically can understand the kinds of isolation that you grow up with if you're in a cult or like homeschooled in a single family cult, right? It is incredible. And just like we always see with isolation, we saw extremism rise. Even in the best of groups, as soon as I used to try to describe this in the Army as like going away together. And as soon as you are total institutioned up, you are like situated people living removed from the world with some sort of formal overlay of life, like group norms matter so much more, and fitting in with the group norms becomes a matter of safety. It feels like life and death to us. And this is why it's so important to be aware of the group norms and the pressure and the social proof that is going on when you are isolated. People have asked me before if small town America, like small towns in America, could be cults. And like, I can see that. I can see that very easily because you have so much isolation. The other thing about like being isolated in something like a small town or anywhere where like all of your social networks are connected together, it's very dangerous. It's a very high exit cost because if you choose not to play the game, you lose everything all at once. And that can be very, very difficult. Psychologists estimate that leaving our high control groups feels like death. And as someone who did it as a 15-year-old, yeah, I think they're right. I've been talking a lot this week about the decade of deconstruction and especially the importance of doing art while we deconstruct. It's also something that Prachi talks about in her book, We Were Exceptional, they call it Exceptional, about the importance of art and identity. And not to mention, there are also studies that show that hobbies, just in general, are closely tied to happiness, which is significant because in cults, you're always supposed to be busy, right? You're never supposed to be idle, exactly because they don't want you to have time to think and because cults are always about labor. So it is important for us to just let ourselves do stuff, take the time, do the hobbies, play the games, do what you need to do. What do I mean by the decade of deconstruction? Well, I have this 3-part model of deconstruction or of leaving a cult, right? Like what that takes. And the first stage is the crack and the brainwashing, which you get with me here in 9/11 and then again in the Army. And then the physically and mentally leaving the cult, right? That's usually what people think of as leaving a cult. Then the second stage comes a whole decade. It starts when you start it, of understanding why you were in a cult and what impacts that had on your personality and identity. This needs to be done whether you joined the cult, whether you were born into the cult, right? Part of deconstruction is taking off the pseudo-identity that the cult gave you. An easy example is I say it's always so fun for me to watch women get out of the military and then just like re-feminize a bit. Because you can't be in the military, with, especially as a woman, without putting on a kind of wooden personality and machoing yourself up, deepening your voice, squaring your shoulders. I always tell people that I can do both. I can do the sickly sweet Michelle Duggar Fundy voice. And I can also do Captain Mestyanek, lock it up, get in line. Voice modulation. Actually figuring out my normal voice, that was an important part of deconstruction. And worry not if you feel you've been doing it for a long time. I did it for a straight 13 years. How do you know when you're done, people asked. Well, I describe it as I realized recently, among other signs, but that I now spend more time living in the awesome life I have built for myself than I spend building that life or dealing with my trauma. And I think that's the dream, because the third stage is moving forward with new models. No models, and new models. And the problem with any time after the cult that you're not deconstructing, I spent 10 years just running, building my life, trying to be successful, but you're building the bad models back in, because that's what you know. When you are finally decide to deconstruct, or are forced to deconstruct, as happened for many of us, often by a complete physical or mental breakdown, which you can read about in my book as well, then we can finally start recognizing the things, naming the things, and not necessarily building them back in. I think once you're able to put a name on it, once I was able to say like, oh, Daniella really likes joining cults, I was able to be like, what's that about? And really like look into those pieces of my personality and decide actively if I wanted to keep those or not. And speaking of art, I'm going to show you one of my projects. So this I call my deconstruction series. And I say like this was my story before I found the words to write the story. So this one is called, the colors are much, much brighter in real life. This one is called Stolen Potential. This one is called Who Am I? Oh, I don't like what the color is doing right now because the colors are super pretty. They're very like toned down here. They're just bright neon. This one is called Who Am I? This one is The Answer, whoever the F I want. That is called Uncultured. I love to do this one in paint and sip nights because it looks very complicated, but it's literally like 5 lines and you personalize it however you want. And this one is called Healed, also very bright pink and blues here that you're not really getting, unfortunately. I do have prints of these, of 2 of these that I sell. I will link them, and then in the links, you'll be able to see how much brighter they are. Well, they're linked to my TikTok, which is how I sell them right now. So you'll have to have a TikTok account, but you will be able to see how pretty they are. After doing some painting for a while, then I was able to find the words to write the book, and which the New York Times called a harrowing memoir, delivered in the tones. Oops, what is it? A propulsive memoir delivered in the honest tones of a woman who didn't always think she'd live to tell her story. The editor of the New York Times Arts and Culture section also called the audiobook one of his favorite things of 2023. But then after I was done writing the book, I came back and I did a 5th painting, which doesn't scale down well, but it's twice as big as the regular paintings. And it's just the face of a woman. There's kind of like no age associated with it. And I just did the face in all the same kind of color scheme. And then I just started writing. And this one is called Deconstruction, right? I just started writing different words on it. And it turned out to be like, everything that the cult told me or said about me, everything that the army told me or said about me, and everything that society tells me or says about me. And it was interesting because after I'd finished it, Mr. Knitting Cult Lady comes along and he's like, oh, it was really pretty before you put all the words on it. And I was like, yes, exactly. This is the point, my friend. Someone asked me this week, and we spent a bit of time talking about, can cults be made by accident? And I don't believe in the accidental cult. I think this is one of the big stereotypes that we get in society, that it started off good and then it just went bad. And every time I look, that is never the case. I always knew that wasn't the case with the children of God, even if though the joiners are parents. On me, it's one parent and one grandparent who were the joiners. My teenage mother was born and raised in the cult as well. They would say, even if it turned out bad in the end, like in the beginning, it was about love, faith, and Jesus, but it wasn't. In the beginning, it was about a narcissistic, incestuous, pedophile, alcoholic dude who wanted to play power games with people. And that's always what it was about. It's hard to build a cult. I don't believe that anyone just trips and falls into coercive control. I once asked another cult expert how cult leaders know how to do it. And he said, I think all cult leaders grew up in cults. We're not going to prove that, but especially once we consider single family cults, I immediately knew that was true about our cult leader who grew up with a mother who was an evangelical revivalist in the 30s and was very physically and sexually abusive to him in the home. We see with Jim Jones, we see with people like Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos and Adam Newman of WeWork. I mean, they are practicing their skills of charisma and rhetoric and manipulating people from childhood. So once again, I don't think anyone trips and falls into coercive control. I also don't think that every group that uses cult tactics is a 10 out of 10 cult, right? But I do think that once you are a 10 out of 10 cult, there's no such thing as less extreme or more extreme cults. It's just a matter of time, money, and impunity. And cults like Mormons, cults like Scientology, and cults like Children of God were able to get as bad as they have gotten because they had time, money, and impunity. Often, of course, having the money and having impunity are connected. Cults are always out for political control, and one of the reasons for that is because they want the time, the money, and the impunity, and to be left alone. Had a lot of conversation this week about, Daniella, you call everything a cult, which makes you lose credibility. And by the way, I call very few things cults. But here's the thing that I tell people. My job is not to make you feel good. My job is not to tell you, everyone's like, well, where's the line? Where's the line between group and cult? There's no line. This is what I'm trying to teach. There is no line, right? Everyone thinks of extremism this way. Everyone thinks that extremism is a line in the sand, just like looking at a map, that you choose whether to cross or not. But what I learned from my days as an intelligence officer for a battalion of combat helicopters on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan is that when you're hovering right over the spot, over that line that you're not supposed to cross because it will be an international border incident, there's no line there. And it's incredibly easy to cross that line, especially when you are surrounded by people who look like you and think like you and are egging you on and telling you that your chosen path is correct. So there's no line. I'm not the deity that names cults. That is the media. And they only do it when we can measure the damage in bodies, dead bodies, branded bodies, raped bodies, etc. So as a not only military officer, but military intelligence officer, the person who was the expert on the bad guy, I do what I know how to do, which is go left of the boom before the bad stuff, all the bad stuff happens, and look for the indicators of danger. This is part of how I built my list of 10 things, right? If you look at it and you have all 10 of those things I listed earlier in an organization that you're part of, congratulations, you're in a cult, and it is ultimately going to hurt you or other people. However, if you only have 5 of those, I'm like, as an individual, leave. If you're the leader, start looking at those 5 places because that's where your toxic behavior is going to be coming in. But I have decided, I don't care about groups, which means I don't care about good groups. I don't care about making them better either. I am here to help individuals understand groups that have hurt them in the past. Psychologists think that it's almost impossible to heal from our cult trauma if we don't understand how cults work. Here to help people understand groups that have hurt them in the past, groups that are hurting them now, and groups that are hurting them in the future. I'm here to give you that information. You do what you will with it, right? And I'm not here to comfort you. I get told, oh, well, if this is your definition, then every group is a cult. Okay. First of all, I only hear that from Americans. And second of all, there is a reason why I'm writing a book called The Culting of America. Part of it is to deal with this incredible dissonance of growing up in what everyone accepts as one of the world's worst cults, and then spending the next 20 years in America and watching as we went all the way to 2016 where we elected a cult leader to run America, and here we are maybe about to do it again, right? It's bonkers crazy. Bonkers crazy. I think that everything you have in common with a cult is important data, and you should look at that all the time. All the time. We should always be looking at where's the danger, where's the threat. And that's part of the problem when people ask me about good groups. As soon as you call yourself the good guys, you are blind to a certain amount of things. Not to mention, that's where the ends justifies the means mentality comes in. right? If we are firm in our sacred assumption that we are the good guys, that we are right, that this guy is the prophet, we will justify anything, including raping children for God, as the children of God did. Let's talk about Ray Dalio, P. Diddy, and the cult of entrepreneurship. Well, how are these things connected? Okay, so this week I found out that Ray Dalio was P. Diddy's finance guy, which was the least surprising information ever. Maybe y'all have often heard me say that there's this group of books that is in the category of the book How to Make Friends and Manipulate People. Influence people. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, who was a Mormon, Ray Dalio's Principles, and quite a few others. And what do I mean by the cult of entrepreneurship? OMG. The entrepreneurship space, the startup space, is so culty. This is what I went into after I left the military, worked at Microsoft for a little bit, left that, went into a nonprofit, also a culty space, for veterans, another culty space, that was about entrepreneurship, a very culty space. I feel like entrepreneurship is a little incubator for cult leaders. And why is this? Well, on my lists, my Guru Gotcha checklist of 20 things to look out for in toxic leaders, and my list of red flags for toxic AF groups, my number one thing for both groups and leaders that is a toxic sign is a focus on your own uniqueness. That's not how the world works. Anyone that's telling you that they are the only one thinking a thing, saying a thing, or doing a thing, them or their group, is trying to cult you or is trying to con you. We do not have, in a world of 8 billion people in the year 2024 of our Lord and Taylor, like, you being the only one doing or thinking something. That is not how it works. Even thoughts move in what are called thought clouds. They say if Newton had been sleeping under that tree and hadn't seen the apple fall, some guy 2 villages down was going to discover gravity in like the next 2 weeks. Google was the 14th search engine on the market. No one is the only one doing something. And when they say that, that is very problematic. So with entrepreneurship though, right? Like, that's kind of the beginning. You thinking that you are so special and you are so unique and you have an idea that nobody else has ever had. And everything is made to be very worshipful of the entrepreneur CEO. A lot of this started with Herb Kelleher and the way he built Southwest, and Steve Jobs and Apple. And since then, and as long as we continue to define good in capitalism as makes money, we are going to have situations like P. Diddy, like WeWork, which was a total cult, like Theranos, the fake blood testing company, which was a total cult, like Harvey Weinstein and Epstein and R. Kelly and Cosby, all of which were basically sex cults. Let's talk a little bit about Donald Trump's sway into the music up on a stage for 30 minutes or more. Geez, oh, yikes. It's just so cult leadery. It's just so, come and be in the spirit with me. And we're not going to have words, but we're going to speak to your soul. This man is so triggering to me. Like, I literally had to just stop watching television in 2016 because it was just like, felt like David Berg had won and was back from the dead running America. Final thing I want to talk about today is Margaret Singer's 19 points on why the Marine Corps isn't a cult. So Margaret Singer, not to be confused with white feminist Margaret Sanger, Margaret Singer was like the godmotheress of cults, sociologist that wrote and did a lot of work about cults. And she has a book called Cults in Our Midst that I love. We're doing it in my book club, my cult theory book club. If you are interested in book clubs, I have 2 book clubs. One is the cult Memoir book club, where we read 12 memoirs in 12 months. This month we're doing Educated, and if you are interested in dropping in on just that one, Everything will be linked. You can buy a seat just for that one, or you can you can sign up for my Patreon at the book club level and drop into either of the book clubs. So then the second book club is the Cult Theory Book Club, and we're reading Cults and Our Myths, Lalich's Take Back Your Life, Alexandra Stein's Love, Terror, and Brainwashing, and Martha Stout's The Sociopath Next Door. And we'll be reading like a third of them, reading or reviewing. I honestly don't expect most people to read all 4 of these textbooks, but we're talking about these different topics. So this week we talked about what is a cult. And at the very end of this section, Margaret Singer has, which I missed in the past somehow, 19 reasons that the Marine Corps isn't a cult. And here's the thing. I wrote a book about how the Army is a cult, and I'm very, very big on being like, no, the Army is a cult. Other groups like AA are cults, and there's harm associated with cults, and I want to talk about that. People get upset, and many cult experts have gotten upset at me for doing this, especially because Margaret Singer had some experience with the military, studying them as a psychologist at Walter Reed, and was adamantly opposed to the military being considered a cult. But there's a couple things with that. So first of all, the one category of people who does not go through basic training in the Army, the identity-breaking indoctrination, is psychologists. I find that to be suspicious. But she wasn't actually a psychologist who was in the military. She just worked with the military. So the interesting conundrum is this, that I only have the language to refute all 19 of her points, and I have, because of the book that she wrote, and then the books that Lalich wrote, and all of the work that different cult experts have done, all the ones who have told me in certain ways that I'm wrong about the military. However, I am the only cult expert that I know of, the only English-speaking one who has military experience at all. And I certainly believe I am the world's expert on cults and the United States military. And I do now have the language to refute her points. What I was most disappointed to find, though, were 2 points that were essentially, you know what you sign up for, and you can leave anytime you want. Both of these, I feel like, are obviously not true, and they're the ones I want to address here, right? So 80% of people in any branch of the military are under a service contract at any given time. We know this. It's called signing your life away. Oh, and they're allowed to lie to you. Recruiters are allowed to lie to you. And the only thing that happens is that in basic training, the first thing your drill sergeants tell you is, we don't care what your recruiter said. We own you now. And a cult expert who had argued with me in the past about this, then came back to me like a year later and was like, wait, I just found out the recruiters are allowed to lie to you. And I remember I was livid. I was like, how dare you? How dare you have a strong opinion about the military being a cult, strong enough to call me, a former Army captain, out on it. And you don't know the first thing about the military, which is they're allowed to lie to you and lock you in a contract and then not give a fuck. And secondly, you're allowed to leave, so you don't know what you signed up for because they're actively hiding it from you. I talk about this several times in Culting of America, which is it takes 6 months to onboard into the Children of God and the U.S. Army. And during that 6 months, you have no idea what you signed up for. And they are actively hiding it from you. It is a deceptive process. But once you get to your unit, once you're a full-blown member in your compound, you've worked pretty freaking hard for those last 6 months. So you are very unlikely to leave just because you don't like the latest revelation or regulation that you are told about. It's absolutely bonkers that nobody on a military base is allowed to walk on the grass. Yet, I didn't know that till I was a year and a half in the military because reasons. And it's bonkers, but I'm not just going to quit because of that, right? And so all these things stack up. You don't know what you signed up for. And this is always a cult form of victim blaming, right? They're actively hiding it from you. But then by the time you've been in long enough, 6 months to a year, and they're like, okay, you get the meat of the word now. We're going to read you in on all the secrets. And you're like, this is BS. So many Mormons feel like this at their temple experience, right? It's been a secret so long. It's been told was so awesome. And then this is BS. And then they'll be like, what? You knew what you signed up for. Nobody forced you. You did this with your eyes open. No, you didn't. Thanks. Secondly, about the leaving. Okay, so 80% of the military is under that service contract where they have signed their life away and they owe a number of years to the military. If you don't fulfill that, you go sit in jail in Leavenworth until your contract is over. You are not free to leave anytime. Even if you, like I was when I get out of the military, are technically free to leave because you've fulfilled your service contract. First, I couldn't leave because I was deployed. Then I couldn't leave because I was sick. And then, when I was better, you ask permission to leave. You have to file paperwork, which takes 6 months to a year to approve, which also means it can be denied and has been very often. It's called stop loss. But even if they're going to approve it, they have 6 months to a year to treat you horribly for quitting the team and to run retention operations. And they have millions of dollars to do just that. And so, as I said to every single one of these experts, it was harder to get out of the U.S. Army than it was to get out of the Children of God, that we all agree is a cult. Please don't come at me with that BS. Some of the points are just things that have changed or that we know differently, right? She says, for example, that the Marine Corps makes you exercise and cults don't make you exercise, which is just not true. I understand maybe they didn't know that in 1995, but in the Children of God, which is a very, very accepted as a cult, we were forced to exercise for 1 to 2 hours a day. Actually, because my stepdad got sick with asthma and the cult leader flipped out and wrote a letter. He would write these letters like the Apostle Paul. And it was called Get Out. Get outside. And we started calling our PT hours, physical fitness, physical training, we started calling it Get Out, or sometimes PT. And we had to work out all the time, all my childhood, all the way up. Going to the military was nothing. But also, we know now that anything in the self-transformation space can draw predators and can become cults. And exercise cults are very common. There's just one called E2M that grew up recently that some of you have started to ask me about. And somebody very close to me was in that. Knew it was a cult, but was like, I need it. And I have been looking at that. But we have karate cults, we have ballet cults, dance cults of all kinds. And oh my goodness, CrossFit, where somebody just died. So it's just simply not true. I don't think there was any malice there. I just think we know a lot more. So at some point, I will probably do a written answer to this 19 reasons that the Marine Corps isn't a cult. I giggle because it's so interesting to me that of the 5 branches at the time, because the Space Force didn't exist, that she could have chosen, she chose the Marine Corps because that is the one that we all know is the cultiest, and nobody will argue about it. We will argue. I say it goes Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force, which is also the same order that sexual violence for women goes in. Some people will argue that the Navy's cultier than the Army or the Air. Nobody argues that the Marines are the cultiest. I also think that just maybe nobody has had the credibility. Every time any expert has started talking about cults, 2 questions come up. What about the military? And what about AA? And I am the first one that I know of. Now, all of the cult experts are talking about the concerns of AA. But in Margaret Singer's day, she was like, no, AA is not a cult, but she wouldn't give a reason. And I think the reason is that everyone thinks they'll lose credibility because these are both so socially accepted. I just don't care. I don't like cults, and I think we need to talk about all of them, especially the ones like the military and AA that are not going away, especially the ones that people say, well, we have to have it. And finally, a note on brainwashing. Because every time I make the point that the military is a cult, and I say the way that we train, basic training is identity breaking indoctrination, thought reform, brainwashing, whatever we want to call it, and people are like, oh, well, it has to be that way, which is fascinating because we didn't start that until well after World War II. Brainwashing wasn't really discovered by the West, even though obviously plenty of people had been building cults and doing it. It wasn't really discovered as a thing until the Korean War. And then modern day basic training, which everybody alive that is a veteran went through, was built by 4 psychologists who studied abusive relationships and cults. A lot of the stuff that was done on the military, by the way, became the beginning of organizational psychology, the discipline that I am educated in. And if you're wondering why corporate America is so culty, it's because most of it was patterned after the military. But the other fascinating thing about the fact that we haven't been using brainwashing forever, only since the end of World War II, which was, oh yeah, the last war that we won. So no, I don't think it's necessary. In fact, I think it's only severely, severely harmed us and made our military do much worse things in the world. When you are operating under an ends justifies the means mentality, there is no end to the horrors that you will justify. And now for some nitpicking. Actually, I've finished very few projects this week because I've been doing some complicated ones. But first, I just have to show off the fun, shiny sweater that nobody believes I didn't make, but I found at a thrift store. And what it is a regular, is this knit? Yeah, I think it's a regular knit sweater. And then very painstakingly were tied on by hand tufts of fun flu yarn. So it's one of the funnest things I own, even though I didn't make it myself. I'll show you this scarf again that I am making right now, just because it's fun. So scarf that I turn into a cardigan, and I'm putting fuzzy sleeves on it, and it's going to be beautiful. This dress, I made this last winter, but I just wore it, and people went gaga. So I took a Calvin Klein sheath dress that I wasn't wearing anymore, and I put puffy sleeves on it, wear it with pleather leggings, and according to my kid, I look like a rich lady. And finally, this one I'm super proud of. So I have, let's say, gone up some sizes because I've been healing my body and my disordered eating and my white supremacist body image and all of this lately. But I have a lot of clothes that I love. I'm very big on the image and the wacky outfits. And I was kind of giving myself permission to, well, let's say still be anorexic because I love my clothes so much. And then I had to have a come to Taylor Swift moment with myself and be like, I make clothes. Stop with the bullshit. So I took these pants that I have that I love. I got them in Argentina right before COVID. They are amazing bell bottoms and they weren't fitting me anymore. So I took them, cut them open down the sides. I put in a strip of granny squares. I'm still going to put like a ribbon behind it, at least so it covers this part. And that also means I increased the pants by 2 inches on each side. And now they fit me again. Bazinga. I'm going to do another one, but with a pair of skinny jeans, white skinny jeans. And I'm going to put rainbow all the way to there. And then I'm going to go big and make them bell bottoms. They're going to be so cool. Stay tuned. And that's our cult situation report for today. Thanks as ever for watching. And please like and subscribe to this channel. Please come find me on TikTok where we have a lot of fun all the time. And I'll see you next Friday for another cult situation report. I am Daniella Mestyanek Young, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. Captain Mestyanek out.